Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Love Positivism podcast. I'm really honored and happy to have Anne Baring here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here with you.
I'm very excited to talk to you today. I've been listening a lot to your lovely webinars, and it came in a perfect time. I've been getting a lot of signals and messages at this time the past few weeks, and then your work came up, and I've heard about your work and your name so much throughout the years, and I'm just so excited to have you here. And for those of you who have not listened to anything about Anne yet, she's a Jungian analyst, a scholar, and an author and co-author of 9 books, and has recently published her latest one, which is Divine Wisdom and the Holy Spirit, the Forgotten Feminine Face of God, and the one before that, The Dream of the Cosmos, A Quest for the Soul. She's a Jungian analyst and lives near Winchester in England, and she's passionately interested in the fate of the earth and the survival of our species in this critically important time of evolutionary change. Her work is devoted to the recognition that we live in an ensouled world and to the restoration of the lost sense of communication between us and the invisible dimension of the universe that is the source or ground of all that we call life. So happy to connect with you, Anne. I am amazed by your life's journey. I feel like I know you already because I listened so much to you. And I'm just, I want to hear everything, but maybe we can start with how you came into this work and writing these incredible books and all the work that you're doing now.
Well, it's quite a long story, as I'm an old lady now, but it started in my 20s at a university when I felt I was looking for something and I didn't know quite what. And when I left university, I didn't know quite what to do, and I messed around for a few years doing nothing particular. And then I had an extraordinary, I went to Rome, and through contacts that I had there, I had the invitation from an Italian encyclopedia of art to travel to the Far East, going to all the countries that I could get to, which was all except China at that time, and to go to the museums and speak to the curators and ask them to choose the very best works of art that they had in their museums. So I did that, and I started in India, and then I went to Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, Taiwan, and on my way back, I went to Burma to go right up to the top to visit the temples in Burma, which of course you can't get to now, and then back to India again. So that took me a year. And at the end of it, I'd learned so much because my mind, although I'd studied medieval history at Oxford and Renaissance history also, it was Europe. And I knew nothing about the Far East, nothing about Hinduism, Buddhism, or Taoism, nothing about Sufism either. And so this began a totally different period of my life in which I had to absorb this huge amount of exciting information, marvelous images from art, which is always one of my great points of interest has been art of all cultures, and starting with the Renaissance Italy and Europe, and also Romanesque France. And so this was an invitation from life to go into a new project, really, a totally new dimension of experience. And that took me, I wrote a book on that called The One Work, A Journey Towards the Self, in which I tried to bring together Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and show that they were all saying the same basic thing through different teachings. And so I did that, and then I got married, and then I had, at the same time, I started a dress shop in London next to Harrods, and I had a baby girl whom I called Francesca after St. Francis. And so that started me off on the practical side of getting myself grounded in life, where I could earn my living, have marvelous dressmakers making the most beautiful dresses that I designed. And that went on for 12 years. But during that time, I had a lot of deep depressions, and I went to have a Jungian analysis to help me help with that. And I had 2 long analyses, one with a man and one with a woman. And at the end of that, I was asked by Mrs. Gerhard Adler, whose husband was one of the 2 editors of Jung's work, if I would like to train to be an analyst. And I said, yes, I would. And so that began a second phase, from the dressmaker phase to the and designing phase to the studying phase of how to become a Jungian analyst. And that took me another 7 years. And then finally, I began to practice as an analyst. But while I was in that second analysis with Gerhard Adler's wife, Hella Adler, I had this visionary dream. And that dream was what really, I was half awake, but not fully awake before. But that visionary dream woke me up, because it was, when you read my book, you'll read about it. But it was a dream of a cosmic woman, a vision of a cosmic woman, stretching from the earth up right to the heights of heaven. I was lying on my back, caught in a net, held by 2 enormous male figures on a mountain on each side of me, with me in a net in the middle. That's the net of incarnation. And the goddess, because that's what I called her, the goddess had a huge wheel in her abdomen. And she pointed to mine, and I saw that I had one too, but it was over on the left. And she indicated, she didn't speak, but she indicated to me that I was to center my wheel. And centering my wheel in Jungian analysis means becoming more conscious, entering the path of individuation, which I was already on, but more intensely now. And so after that, I realized that I had to devote myself to her. And I wondered who she was, because she wasn't like the Virgin Mary. She wasn't like any of the Greek goddesses. She was naked, very beautiful, with long golden hair, and probably a mature woman in her sort of 40s or 50s. And I knew she wasn't any of the Greek or Roman goddesses or the Eastern goddesses. And so I was working at the time on a book called The Dream of my first big book, which was called I can't even remember my own books.
Is it the one word?
The Goddess, Evolution of an Image. And I wrote it with a friend, and it took us 10 years, but I'd already written that book when I had this extraordinary vision. And in the book, I'd mentioned the Shekinah of Kabbalah. And this took me back into Kabbalah, and I realized that the goddess of my dream, or my vision, was the Shekinah of Kabbalah. There was nobody else that fitted that description. So I had no connection with the Jewish tradition whatsoever in my childhood, but here I was right in the middle of the Jewish tradition, having a vision of the goddess that the Jewish people once knew and worshipped. So that set me on a quest, and which I've brought to the end of the quest with my new book, which describes how we lost the Shekinah, how we lost the divine feminine, and how we were deeply in the patriarchal period by then, 2,000 years already into it. And we've been in another 2,000 years in it, sort of thing, or 4,000 altogether. And it's coming to an end now in all the turmoil that you can see in Gaza, in Ukraine, in China, in Russia, in Burma and Thailand, where everybody is fighting with everybody else. This is all a prelude or a beginning of the huge change of consciousness that we need to move into a new civilization and a new era, guided by the divine feminine, and hopefully in harmony with the divine masculine, because we don't want to discard either of the masculine or the feminine. We need to bring them together in a sacred marriage. So that is what my work is at the moment. That's what my last book is about, how to bring about this sacred marriage. And in fact, the last chapter of The Myth of the Goddess was called The Sacred Marriage. So already in the 1980s, I was thinking of that image. But it takes a long time, lifetime, to get to develop enough consciousness and enough ability to express what you want. It may take 50 years, which it did, between the time I had the vision and the writing of these books. So one should never despair that it's too late, because it just takes time. Some people come into it immediately when they're born. Other people, like me, take a long time. So that's the history, you see. So it's a long and interesting history, taking me into different cultures, not through my choice, but through fate or through guidance. I take it as divine guidance. I was meant to know about these Eastern religions. I was meant to know about Christianity and Islam, because I've studied Sufism. And so it's taken me on a great journey of discovery, for which I'm immensely grateful to life for arranging these things so beautifully. And also meeting people that helped me, because there was a great deal of help on the way from different people.
Thank you for sharing that. It's incredible, because I listened to you and your life story in different podcasts, and yeah, it's a really long path of discovery and getting these beautiful messages out that you have. And when I reflect on the cosmic lady that you spoke about, the first thing I thought of was my own journey with the goddess. My first real initiation into it was through the temple of daughters of Ishtar. And the first emanation, we worked throughout the cycle with the different aspects. And the first one, when doing the practices, was Nuit, the cosmic goddess, like the universal, the stars, the planets, all of that aspect, because we usually connected with Mother Earth, and but I really love that. And then I was also drawn to your work, which is, I mean, it's like you said, I would love to hear from your research the history, because if we look back at the mythologies of my ancestral lands and Ishtar and Inanna and all of that, and then leading up to now, so much has changed. And I know that you researched so much of that and where that got cut off as well. So I would love for you to share that.
Well, I think it was before 4,000 years ago, we had temples to the goddess everywhere. We had them, first of all, in Egypt, and then in Sumer, and then in Babylon, of course, with Ishtar. And then later on, going in Persia, we had Anahita. And then we had the Greek and the Roman goddesses. So there was a long history of temples to the goddess where women served, because naturally it was not men serving in the temples of the goddess, it was women. And then all of a sudden that was shut off. There were no more temples. They were destroyed mostly by Christians, I'm afraid to say. And they were shut down or abandoned, and there were no priestesses trained to be in them anymore. And so women were left without any channel of connection to the divine image of themselves. And that happened, as I said, over a period of 2,000 to 4,000 years. And today we're looking at the wreckage that has been left by that loss of the divine feminine, because the imbalance now is so great that we're on a path to our own destruction if we don't hold back and realize what's happened. And so all my work has been based on the historical understanding of what's happened, not saying that something has to change from one day to the other, but because we're just on the cusp of a new age, the age of Aquarius, astrologically speaking, and leaving the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, where this dichotomy arose between the two archetypal principles, we're in a very great phase of flux and danger and difficulties and conflict, and people have no idea what they're involved in when these wars take them over, or why they're taking them over, why leaders continually embark on these wars. to the great suffering of women who lose their sons, which is terrible. Almost 2 million young men have died in Ukraine and Russia and Ukraine. 2 million young lives just wiped out like that. And this fills me with horror and also anger, because this cannot go on. And so my work is really devoted to trying to bring about this change, mainly in women's psyche, but also in men's, because women are quite unconscious of who they are and how important they are. They have no idea of their value. So a lot of my work has been connected with that, trying to give women a feeling of why they are absolutely vital to this change, why their voice has to speak up now. I mean, when you look at the UN and the leaders, that when Trump's speaking last night and everything, where are the women? And where is their voice? There are women in the UN, but you never hear their voice. So what's happened? What do you feel about it?
Yeah, that's been many years of pondering on that, starting with, like you said, anger and resentment and trying to figure out. So I think my journey also led into like, but why are we so disconnected to the divine feminine, and why do we have to live like this, and so much integration needs to be done. But it's really like you said, we it feels like we have been, because I was discussing this yesterday actually, like all of these issues that we have, it's like it's not a current problem, it's probably thousands of years of the same patterns, and the conquering and that whole energy coming in and wanting to. And I think you mentioned this, like why was there when we have these natural disasters, sometimes maybe the energies get so dense, and then there is a need for reset, and that happens in our lives all the time. But also what I see from all of these past few years, huge consciousness, it's like a polarity right now of like being aware and being very this whole movement on many levels. But it's not only, shouldn't be only like a political movement or a mental logical movement. It's also about coming back to understanding why we have become so disconnected to spirituality and religion, because it's been uneven, unbalanced. I think if we look in India, where there is like a total, at least the goddess is still very much, I mean, we're in Navaratri right now, and so much devotion to the divine feminine. They're still very much into their ancient beliefs. But what happened to when the Abrahamic tradition also, I mean, probably much before that as well. What did you find? Is this in the divine wisdom and the Holy Spirit, the forgotten face of God? I think you mentioned Asherah and that whole.
Because originally Asherah was married to Yahweh. But then suddenly in 623, under a king called King Josiah, he told some Deuteronomist priests to go into the temple and get rid of every trace of the old religion, to get rid of the goddess, to cut down her groves of sacred trees, and to get rid of every conceivable statue, including the statue in the temple of her, and the great bronze serpent that was also in the temple, which was her power to regenerate life. She was a symbol of that. So the king said, get rid of the lot, and get rid of the high priest as well, probably. So I don't know what happened to him, because he used to go up onto the roof of the temple every night and commune with the stars. They were called the hosts of heaven. So beautiful. So he had instruments of some kind where he was able to see the stars, possibly because he'd studied them for a long time. And also there were priestesses in that temple. Priestesses devoted to Asherah and weaving her garments and things like that. So overnight, all that went. And soon there was no trace of her. No, she was just not remembered. But the traditions of the first temple and the worship of the goddess was taken by Jewish people who didn't like what was happening and who went to Alexandria. They left Jerusalem and went to Alexandria. And then Alexandria became the center of an enormous growth of Gnostic wisdom, and spreading from Alexandria east and west, north and south. And it was most extraordinary until the time of Christianity, when unfortunately the Christian church, under the rule of Constantine, the first emperor, the emperor who made the church part of the Roman Empire, that ended. The whole Gnostic flowering, as it were, was stopped, and all the gospels were destroyed and the people were killed, and God knows what happened. And then they also, at that time, under a later emperor in the same century, in the 4th century, an emperor called Theodosius, they destroyed all the Greek temples to the goddess, like the one at Eleusis, the most famous one that had been there for 3,000 years. They tried to destroy it, and they forbade anybody to go there. So this is a huge change which happened to begin with in the Hebrew religion. But then it must have spread from there, and then the patriarchal religions came up, each with their emphasis on the transcendent Father God. And when that happened, we lost the umbilical cord that connected us to nature, because the goddess represented not only the cosmos, but also nature. And nature was sacred because it was the domain of the goddess. She was the great mother, so to speak, but she was also the great mother in the heavens. So there's the dual aspect of the goddess there. Which, in my dream, that was very clear, because although she had her feet on the earth, her head was in the highest starry heaven.
And I love that you weaved in the, I've been also very interested and had guests on around Gnosticism and that whole teaching, and also the connection with, and I know you have spoken about this a lot, and I'm wondering if it's also in your new book around Mary Magdalene and
yes, the chapter on Mary Magdalene and the Essenes, very important chapter. Mm-hmm. Mary Magdalene was married to Jesus, and she accompanied him on his mission, and she wrote a gospel called the Gospel of the Beloved Companion. That was the very first gospel that the Gospel of John copied later on. So this is all in my book, the history of that. And thanks to other wonderful scholars, one called Anine van der Meer, and an Old Testament scholar called Dr. Margaret Barker. Those two women helped me to discover all this and put it all together. Anine van der Meer wrote an enormous book proving phrase by phrase and chapter by chapter that the Gospel of John had copied the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Fascinating.
And that's something that I feel is re-emerging in our consciousness now, that there are two very important leaders and prophets in this tradition. It's both Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, which are completely, or at least partially, or almost all of their stories are not present in the tradition. But maybe for those who are listening, what have you seen around the story of Mary Magdalene? Maybe some who are listening don't know the whole what happened when the Christian church was founded. And I studied religion as well, so I had the opportunity to read the roots of Christianity and the evolving churches. So, but I would love to hear from you what you've seen in your research about Mary Magdalene.
Yes, well, I've always been interested in her, and I have 2 talks on her on my website, actually. But what fascinated me, I got in touch with some channeled books, which were very, very interesting, very high quality. And because my mother had received channeled messages when I was in my teens and 20s, and for 30 years she received these messages, which I've put into my new book, the essence of them, I knew that when you have good channelers, you can have accurate messages from the other side, so to speak. So I read these books and I put the quintessence of them into my chapter on the Essenes and also on Mary Magdalene. And what I found out through them was so interesting about both Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, that Jesus, or Yeshua as he's called in the books, wanted to have 2 groups of 144 disciples, one of women, 144 women, and 144 men. And the women were to keep the inner relationship with the divine ground, and the men were to go out into the world, because women at that time couldn't possibly have gone out into the world and preached and taught. So the men went into the world, and the women were supposed to stay together and guided by Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene to develop the teaching and help the men to take it out into the world. So that's utterly different from what we've been told. Mother Mary was not a meek, sort of gentle creature. She was a very powerful woman, and she took charge of all these women, 144 women. And Mary Magdalene was a teacher. She'd also been a priestess of Isis, and so had Mother Mary. So you get a totally different view of both these women from reading this channeled material. So I would urge people, if they're interested, to read my book, and they'll understand so much more when they have done that. But this is much more than I could put into my webinar, because I didn't know it. When I did my webinars on Mary Magdalene, I didn't know all this fascinating material was available. So that's how I came to understand. So the group around Jesus was much, much bigger than we have. It wasn't just a few disciples, say 12 disciples, 12 apostles. It was twice 144. That's 288, I think, men and women working together in harmony. And unfortunately, Peter, the Apostle Peter, was very jealous of Mary Magdalene and did his best to shut her up. He didn't like women interfering with men's business, much as we've known since then. And so he blocked her and because he thought he was to be the founder of the church, he didn't want any women messing up his church. And that's why we lost all the women, really. I think it was probably Peter's decision, and a few of his friends like Andrew as well. So all this is so human and so interesting and so real, because one gets a totally different picture of the early years of Christianity. And up until the 4th century, the Gnostics, which were teaching the Essene teaching, because Mary Magdalene took the Essene teaching to France, and she took it in AD 44, and she lived there teaching for 20 years, and she's buried there. So there's a tradition, really, of her teaching in France, which gave rise 1,000 years later to the great Gothic cathedrals, and probably came through. We don't know exactly what the line was of descent, and I don't think it matters terribly, but there was enough teaching to keep it alive for 1,000 years. And so the whole impetus of the Gothic cathedrals arose out of the worship of the divine feminine, the worship of the Virgin Mary, but also Mary Magdalene, which is less known. She was included in that divine feminine, as she was the wife of Jesus, and also a great teacher in her own right. She and Jesus together held the masculine and feminine sacred marriage that was missing from the temple from the time of 623 BCE. So I hope I've made that clear. I hope I've interested whoever is listening, because there's so much to be discovered that puts in the shade what we've been taught, that teaches that we are divine and immortal. This is what Jesus was teaching. This is what other teachers in the East have taught as well. So there's just so much to be discovered about who we are and why we're here. And this is what interests me, because if people don't know why they've come to this planet, they may go in all sorts of directions and ruin their life for all kinds of reasons. If they knew more and looked for more, they could become much more conscious of what they're doing here and why they're here, why life has sent them back to this planet, which at the moment, no picnic to be on.
No, exactly. Because the way things have been imprinted within our physical body through teachings that have been one-sided and imbalanced, it might take time to reprogram that aspect of us, and at the same time our soul might remember other aspects, but it can get confusing, I guess. But this movement now that I feel has been very strong thanks to social media and the whole evolution of spreading information and communication through these platforms, it must at least lead to some change. And interestingly, when I did my opposition on when doing my master's thesis, it was a study on, I had to read a study on how Mother Mary is starting to come back in the Swedish church, which is yeah, and it was interviews with many different high level work. I mean, Sweden is very secularized, but we have the Swedish church, which is Protestant, which is our main state church. And it's very different when it comes to iconography, and it's very not much, but one can see more and more of Mother Mary. And she was, it seems like even if they are not doing it, though the priests she was speaking to and deacons, even if it wasn't an external preaching as much, but it was the personal relationship and importance was actually higher than she thought. So there is something reawakening even in these traditional institutions, it looks like. But yeah, I think that popular culture, but also the women's awakening in spirituality is important, because you also mentioned in your talk about the rise of feminism and how that led to positive things in societies on other levels. But it's also to have that recognition on a spiritual, religious level. My native language is Kurdish, and in Kurdish we don't have gendered language at all. We don't have he, she, and therefore we would never call the source he or she, even because we don't even call each other that. So it's really, language does a lot too to our psyche.
That's interesting. I call it the divine ground. I don't call it God or goddess, because I think we want to get beyond the gendered terms.
Yeah.
So it is, the whole cosmos is divine in my view, and every aspect of matter is sacred because of that. So this has been lost, the understanding that nature is sacred and all aspects are to be loved, protected, and cherished has gone completely. So we've had scientific materialism for 300 years, which has created probably the secular culture in Sweden, but also in my country. It's extremely secular and has turned against the Christian religion, but not everyone, but a good portion of the politicians and the management of the country is in the hands of people who don't believe in anything. So except more power or whatever they're doing, sort of thing. But they haven't got the deep ground, and they're not aware of their soul. And the whole concept of the soul and God has been thrown out by scientific materialism, which I go into in the first chapter of my book. And this has been a disaster, because children have been brought up in schools for now 3 or 4 generations with the idea that the cosmos is dead and that we are the only living creatures in it, and that material reality is the only reality there is nothing else beyond. And this is terrible, because it's absolutely shut down. It's put a ceiling on the development of every child. And that's what I'm working to develop a new system of education, which includes the divine in it, which includes education with nature, becoming familiar with plants and animals and insects, every sort of thing should be part of children's early education. And then they can go on to the history and the geography and all that, but they need a foundation of their sensory awareness being awakened to the divinity of the life around them.
Definitely. And it is for us living in the Western world, and especially our countries, it's very rare to even speak about it, and in different settings, and it's so shut off. And then someone like me who grew up with two cultures, I can see the difference in the way we speak about it. It's so much more integrated in my native language and in our culture, that it's not a strange thing to listen to your dreams, and to have it's integrated much more. But I'm also just curious, because I just had a podcast on Sufism with another Swede who's a scholar and has a big YouTube channel and speaks a lot about Sufism. He studied it, and I haven't heard in your other talks you mentioning Sufism. How did that study come about?
Well, because I was a great friend of somebody called Andrew Harvey.
Oh, yeah.
And Andrew Harvey knew all about Sufism, and Rumi above all. He was passionately in love with Rumi. So I gathered a lot from him. But I also, I've had several friends who were Sufis. There's one who's teaching in Amsterdam at the moment, who's a lovely person called Faranak. I can't remember her last name, but she's teaching people about mysticism and things like that. So I've always known it about. Also, she's writing a thesis on Anahita. So I've learned about Anahita from her. And I've learned about the whole, I know about Surawadi and Attar, because I wrote a book for children based on the book by Attar called The Conference of the Birds. And that's one of my 9 books. And so I studied Sufism to understand Attar and what he was speaking about in that wonderful book that he wrote. So it's there in my bones. I probably had a life in Persia or somewhere around there at some time. And anyway, I don't warm to Orthodox Islam. I find it very frightening. So I've turned to Sufism because I've rejected the cruelty that I saw in the Islamic attempt to take over the world, so to speak, with the jihad and all that business not so long ago. And I was revolted by that. So I turned away from Orthodox Islam, but turned towards the mystical aspect, the Sufism, which to me is the true teaching of Islam. It's this, again, it's the sacredness of everything. And also the symbolism of the rose, very important as a symbol of the soul, and the symbol of the divine element within all of us. Because I think what the religions have failed to teach their followers is that we carry divinity within us. They've made us worship the divine, but they haven't told people that they carry this divine spark, and that they need to learn to listen to it and to their heart, because the heart is the key.
That's beautiful. And is there anything else? I mean, you have so much beautiful work on YouTube, your channel. So I would definitely recommend everyone to listen and look at your beautiful presentations. We didn't tap into your, not the latest book, but is it The Dream of the Cosmos? The Dream of the Cosmos, A Quest for the Soul. Was that the book that was based on your mother's work?
It started with that. It started with the messages that came, and also with an experience I had of leaving my body and going into a dimension that I had no idea existed. And I was terrified, aged, I think, 11, about how to get back into my body. But I did get back, but I didn't repeat that experience because I was too frightened when I had the feeling coming on of being taken into something too powerful. I fought against it because I was frightened. But I did have that one experience, and that was all I needed, because it gave me the understanding that we don't live only in this dimension, that there is another one that we know nothing about. And it was manifested to me as blackness, just going into blackness, which of course is an image of the divine. But I didn't know at age 11, I didn't know anything. But I had that experience, and that led me to trust my intuition and my heart, and to develop my mind, which I realized I needed to do, I get university education and everything, and to make this wonderful journey to the East, but then to use it in the service of the divine. All the knowledge that I'd gathered, all the experience, I needed to put it in a container that would serve the divine. And that was the books, really, were the container.
Beautiful. I'm so grateful to hear all from your life story and all the beautiful insights that you're sharing. It's really powerful and important. And is there anything else that's coming up or that you're working on that is important to share now?
No, I'm resting.
Yeah, after many books.
The last book was very, very tiring, and my body suffered because I had to spend so long with the computer, particularly doing decks, which was a huge work. And so I'm resting now and doing things which I have to manage the household, because my husband is not, he's crippled in one way, he can't walk. So we have carers looking after him. But luckily I have my daughter and my grandson next door, so I see them once a week, which is wonderful. And I just try and nourish them as much as I can, because both of them are dyslexic and will never read my books. So I have to teach them just through other ways, and just through being who I am, and hoping that something will wake up in their souls, because they are already lovely people and beautiful souls, as it were. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm having a rest. I've got to see about my back, which next week I'm going to have some treatment for. And so I'm careful not to push myself too much now. And I've done my life work. I've got now 3 major books, which I'm very proud of. The Myth of the Goddess was the first one. And then the Sufi one about the Conference of the Birds, which is called The Birds Who Flew Beyond Time, and discovered the great being at the ground of time. And the message of the great being was to take back to the earth, that they would help the earth and they would serve the earth. And so that was the message of that book, really. And it's still selling many copies, which is nice. And they can all be seen on my website. All my books are listed. And also The Dream of the Cosmos has been translated into French and Italian, so it can be read in those languages. And The Myth of the Goddess has been translated into Spanish. Long time ago.
Well, that's great. And then that there will be audio.
Audio of each book there will be by Christmas, yes.
That's great.
And it will be free. I don't charge anything for the work that I do at all. So they will be free and available to everybody.
That's incredible. I can't wait to read and listen, because I like to do both, because it's different ways of integrating wisdom teachings. So I'm really grateful. I will link to your website and to the books and YouTube channel. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share with our audience.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to speak to you, who are so understanding and interesting to talk to. I wish we had more conversations together. But I'm welcome as well, because I think you would be interested to meet her.
Lovely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And thank you.